The water pressure dropped mid-sentence. 1 second, the HOA president was lecturing 200 homeowners about community safety. The next, people were shouting. Faucets were sputtering. Toilets stopped refilling. And the woman who had spent months threatening to bankrupt me was standing on stage, realizing she'd just lost control of everything. If you've ever been bullied by an HOA, disrespected because you didn't have money, or told to just comply, hit like, subscribe and get comfortable. Because this story proves one thing. You don't need power to win, you need patience, proof and timing. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I'm 52 years old. 8 months ago, I inherited 1,000 acres of ranch land just outside Redwood Hollow, Texas. Land that had been in my family longer than most of the houses in this county had existed. The farmhouse still creaks at night the same way it did when I was a kid. The porch boards sag exactly where my grandfather used to sit every evening with his coffee. Every morning, I stand at the kitchen window and look out over rolling hills that carry 4 generations of sweat in their soil. I live quietly. Semi-retired electrician. Social Security and the occasional wiring job when someone needs help. My wife Lena died of cancer last winter. The house never got quiet afterward, it got loud in a different way. Silence that presses on your ears. Rooms that feel too big. Lena used to say this land was our blessing and our burden. She dreamed about starting a scholarship fund for local kids who couldn't afford trade school. Smart kids. Hard workers. Just broke. We never quite had the money. But the land? The land was priceless. And apparently someone else wanted it. I was standing at my grandfather's old cattle gate when I heard tires screaming on gravel. A white BMW X7 skidded to a stop like it owned the road. Dust rolled across my boots. Out stepped Victoria Langford, HOA president, attorney, and the kind of woman who treats dirt like a personal insult. Designer sunglasses. Perfect hair. Clipboard clutched so tight her knuckles were white. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask permission. She shoved papers into my chest. You need to remove this gate immediately. You're blocking our private access road. Private. The word hit me wrong. This was the same road my grandfather carved out in 1962 with a borrowed bulldozer and a case of beer. I could still smell the cedar posts when the sun hit them right. Victoria waved her manicured hand dismissively. This road has been a public easement for years. She said it like a fact. Like history could be overwritten by confidence. I didn't argue. Didn't raise my voice. I just nodded and walked back to my truck. Because the county surveyor was scheduled for tomorrow morning. And Victoria had no idea where her million-dollar homes were actually sitting. A week later the lawsuit arrived. Not a conversation. Not mediation. A lawsuit. $50,000. Unlawful obstruction. Interference with infrastructure. Willful harassment of a residential community. My hands shook as I read it. $50,000 might as well have been $50 million. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with papers spread everywhere. Lena's photo watched me from the corner. I hadn't felt that powerless since the night the doctor said, "We've done everything we can." But my grandfather used to say, when you can't afford to fight hard, fight smart. So the next morning I went to the courthouse. The county records office smells like dust, old paper and burnt coffee. The clerk, Mrs. Delaney, had worked there longer than I'd been alive. When I explained what I was looking for, she got quiet. Then she leaned in. That HOA easement expired last December. I felt my heart skip. Turns out my grandfather signed a 25-year temporary access agreement back in 1998. Temporary meant temporary. It expired. No renewal. No extension. For 11 months that HOA had been trespassing. And Victoria knew it. At 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, I woke to the sound of bolt cutters. HOA maintenance workers were cutting my fence, 3 different spots. Metal snapped like gunshots. Within an hour, 12 cattle were loose. Traffic backed up. People filming. A sheriff's deputy telling me my livestock were now a public safety issue. Humiliation burned hotter than anger. But I documented everything. Photos. Videos. Measurements. Deputy Luis Moreno pulled me aside. You're not the first. They've bullied half a dozen neighbors. That's when I bought security cameras. And stopped reacting. 2 weeks later, a county inspector showed up at my well. Complaint filed. Claim, I was illegally draining the community aquifer. 48 hours to prove water rights or face a $10,000 fine and permanent shutdown. Victoria stood nearby with a hydrologist in a suit. Smiling. She thought she'd found my weak spot. She didn't know my grandfather kept everything. In the barn buried in old files I found it. 1964 well permit. spring rights in perpetuity, and a business card. Harold Pierce, county engineer, Rhett. He remembered my grandfather. And what he told me flipped the entire case. Their entire subdivision depends on your spring. They weren't losing water. They were stealing it. Back at the courthouse, I asked for the HOA's easement filing. The clerk froze. This document is dated 2017, but your grandfather died in 2015. For a dead man's signature. Filed by Pinnacle Ridge Development, the same company Victoria had worked for as legal counsel. This wasn't bullying. This was felony fraud. I installed remote-controlled water shutoff valves where the HOA's lines crossed my property. Legal. Hidden. Precise. Maria Alvarez from Legal Aid filed a quiet title action. Local investigative reporter Rachel Kim got involved. Federal investigators followed. Victoria panicked. Tried to bribe a county water inspector. Caught on audio. That's when I stopped worrying. And started waiting. Thursday night. Packed room. Victoria on stage, spinning lies about harassment and community safety. At 7:30 p.m. I tapped my phone. Water shut off. Confusion. Shouting. Panic. Victoria screamed sabotage. Deputy Moreno stepped forward. Ma'am, you're under investigation. I walked to the front. Displayed the forged signature. Medical records. Water dependency data. Federal agents entered. Victoria collapsed. She resigned that night. HOA settled. $75,000 damages. Monthly access fees. Legal costs covered. Victoria was later charged with fraud and bribery. Disbarred. Facing prison. 6 months later, I stood in the same building. The Lena Caldwell Memorial Trade Scholarship was announced. 3 students. Full rides. Lena's dream. Alive. The land stayed ours. The water flowed fairly. And I learned something important. Power depends on silence. Bullies depend on fear. And truth collapses both. If this story hit home, like, subscribe and tell us below. What's the worst HOA abuse you've ever seen?